Hello and welcome to today's webinar, which is titled How to Create Your First Model-Driven Power App. So today we're going to be taking a look at model-driven apps and be talking about all the kind of fundamental elements of model-driven apps. If you're new to kind of Power Apps and you're kind of wondering what the difference between Canvas apps, model-driven apps are, we're going to be taking a look at that today. So quick introduction, my name is Dougie Wood. I'm one of the solution architects at Valto, and I've been working with Power Platform for the past few years and been working heavily with SharePoint as a document management system for the past sort of 10 years. What we're going to be talking about today, so as I say, what are Canvas Power Apps? So we're going to be talking a little bit about what are Canvas apps and what are model-driven apps, because they are two completely different things. So it's worth understanding what the two different things are and why you might use one over the other. I've got a couple of model-driven app examples I'm just going to quickly show you as well. So just before we jump into actually taking a look at how we actually start building out model-driven apps, it's worth seeing some fully fledged kind of applications of how it's being used, and then you can understand how some of the components of this come together afterwards. So some webinar takeaways. So we're going to actually be looking at how to build a model-driven app. So we're going to just literally build a very quick example, like a hello world type of model-driven app, just so you can get to see the fundamental components, which is essentially creating a solution file and then building out a table in Dataverse, adding columns to that table, creating a form for the table to use to interact with the data, ordering a view, so actually how do people see the data inside of the table in the model-driven app, and then we'll talk a bit about business rules and business process flows as well, and what those actually do in terms of our model-driven apps. So the first thing I want to talk about then are Canvas Power Apps. If you watch any of our previous kind of webinars, we've talked a lot about Canvas Power Apps in the past, and they do play a major part in terms of the Power Platform. The purpose of a Canvas app is that it digitally transforms business processes with low code. So what that actually means is that you can build applications and you don't need to be a sort of full stack developer or web developer or anything like that to understand how to write code and that sort of stuff. When we're talking about low code, the types of formulas which are being used in Canvas Power Apps are very similar to like Excel based formulas. And it gets its term Canvas apps because it's actually a very kind of well, it's literally a blank space when you first start off with it, and then you can use some pre-built kind of controls to interact with data. It's a lot of drag and drop with very minimalistic kind of low code. So as it says there, Power Platform has a visual canvas to help you design and build apps. Known as Canvas apps, these provide a simplistic environment to create what you need. Rather than using complicated code or programming tools, you have an easy drag and drop interface programmed with Excel-like formulas. So that summarizes what Canvas apps are. Now, a model-driven app is actually, well, it's kind of alludes to it in the name. Model meaning that it's the model of the data. That's what it's focusing on. So a model-driven app integrates with business data on a mobile-friendly kind of app. And model-driven apps start with your data. So think about the structure of your data, and then you build up from that shape of your core kind of business data and processes in a common data service, which is now actually called Dataverse, to model forms, views, and other components. So model-driven apps quickly generate great kind of UI that is responsive across devices. So what we mean by that is that these kind of layouts that we're going to see, that are all kind of pre-built for you. So as a Canvas app, it's very much about designing the user interface, very sort of granular to a certain extent of how you want it to look and feel. Whereas a model-driven app really is for sort of scenarios where you're not really too bothered about the actual user interface. It's much more about what data you're capturing and the process in which you're capturing it. And model-driven apps will allow you to build that very quickly in comparison to Canvas apps where building out the actual user interface can take up a lot of time. So model-driven apps, you focus on building out the structure of your data first, and then basically right at the last minute, it will automatically kind of create you this interface using this kind of out-of-the-box functionality. So those are the two kind of applications you have to build in the Power Platform: Canvas apps, model-driven apps. As I say, to summarize, Canvas apps, if you wanted to create something completely bespoke, you can create that. The benefits of that is that, as you say, you can create it completely from scratch how you want it, get it to be branded how you want it, use the kind of layouts and functionality that you want, and completely customize it to how you want it to look and feel. So that's the pros of that. The cons are that it takes longer to build. And also you're more likely to build accidentally sort of bugs into it, because you are literally designing everything that's on the page, the navigation, the filter buttons, the drop downs, everything you're building from scratch. Whereas with model driven apps, the pro essentially of that, the benefit of it, is that all of that's built for you. It's already got the kind of list controls with the filters and the search and all that sort of built directly into it. You don't have to build any of that. But the downside is you are very locked in. That it's very rigid, that you are locked into that look and feel. So I do get customers sometimes saying to me, well, we will have to look at doing canvas apps for certain elements of the solution, because the actual model driven app just doesn't provide the kind of the look and feel, or sometimes the simplicity of an application. So if it was like an app you were building that was for sort of people who are non-technical, or maybe even sort of people who are kind of using on mobile devices and things like that, which are not necessarily used to using kind of mobile apps, then Canvas apps can give you that leverage, because you can really design it, maybe put some large buttons in, maybe really simplify it so there's only 2 options on a screen or something like that. Whereas model-driven apps is a little bit more detailed in what you can kind of see on the screen. So let's just jump in and have a little look at a few examples then of what model-driven apps can do. So here's one example. So the examples, the first few I'm showing here are actually Microsoft examples, which they can give you. So you can get access to these directly through Powerapps and deploy them as a template yourself and have a little play around with them. So the first one is a fundraiser donation. So it's basically about all tracking donations. Now, in model-driven apps, this is what the layout of model-driven apps will always look like. You'll have a navigation bar on the left-hand side here, where you can have links to certain tables or areas of the model-driven app, and then you'll always have your controls across the top of the page as well. So the first page here we've got this pre-built is dashboards. So dashboards are very common in model-driven apps. It's essentially a way of summarizing the data which lives inside of the app, allows you to drill down into some of the areas of the application as well. So one area in here is a fundraiser. So the way this particular app works is that you actually can create a fundraiser as a record. So there's a table here of things to fundraise for. So you click on new and you can create a new one with an owner and a story and things like that, any details to the video link. So let's just jump into one that's already created. So you can see this one's populated. It's got video links and total amount of donations and things like that. Then we actually have a table for donations. So the actual donations table is where all the kind of donations are then going to be added to. So you can see here, gyms have donated £50 for this particular category and things like that. And actually, these 2 tables actually have a relationship between them. So if I go back to the fundraiser, go back into, say, for example, special events, if I go to donations, I can see all the donations which have been made specifically for this fundraiser, which is a special events fundraiser. So another key benefit of using a model-driven app over a lot of other kind of applications is that actually it has that relationship model between the tables, and that again automatically pulls through into the model-driven app once you've actually created those relationships. So that's just one quick example. Another one is an innovation challenge, where basically people are, in the organization are challenged to come up with new solutions to problems the business is facing. Again, a dashboard, so we can see all the different active challenges which are going on around the organization, any ideas that have been recently submitted, top sort of ideas that have been submitted that people have voted on, said this is a great idea. On the left-hand side, we see all the challenges. So this is where the organisation come in and say, okay, we've got a problem, or we're trying to have a sort of renewable energy kind of internal project to sort of find ways that we can improve our renewable energy. And once those are created, people can actually submit ideas against those. So you can come in here, create a new idea, and you can select what kind of sort of the name, description, investment that's required, the status reason, idea, things like that. And then that's all linked back up into the challenges. So again, when you go back into the challenge, you'll be able to see a sort of breakdown of all the contributed ideas. So another thing which is being brought in now at this particular application is what's known as a business process flow. So across the top up here, a business process flow simply just means different stages, different gateways that a particular record in a table could go through. So actually this challenge, which is the 3D printing challenge, has actually got 4 different stages. So it's got setup, it's got track, select and execute, and then close and award. So those are the different gateways, those are different stages that this record could actually travel through. There's other ones as well, so just conscious of time, I'll just quickly just fly through these. So things like having kind of products lists that you can then have reservations and sort of book those particular products or assets out, as well as provide reviews about them and what you kind of think about those particular products, for example. And another one here, one that we're looking at, is a contract management system. So this is something that actually is a proof of concept that we've been working with one of our clients with, where once contract is submitted via email, automatically we use Power Automate to pull out the email and take out the key details, and then put into this contract some of the details, account, the name, phone numbers, addresses, things like that. And we're also leveraging the timeline functionality inside of model-driven apps. So this is a really cool piece of feature where you can sort of add in certain things that you're doing, like emails, appointments, phone calls, tasks, updates, general things like that, and it'll build our timeline of what's been going on inside of this particular record. So that's a great way of seeing a sort of audit trail or a history of what's happened in a context of that record. So those are just some general examples, and hopefully it'll set the scene of what a model-driven app will look like. So we saw 4 examples there, and you can actually see they all look very similar in terms of their look and feel. And that's what I was saying before about how model-driven apps, they're very rigid. They look a very specific way, and if you don't like that, then model-driven apps isn't for you. You might want to think about Canvas apps and creating something very specific in the look and feel. If you're more motivated by actually just getting a form created quickly, submitting data, getting it together, being able to filter on it, create dashboards, create charts, things like that very quickly, the model-driven app should be something that you consider. So what we're going to take a look at now is actually building out our sort of first model-driven apps, our hello world type of application. So I'm not necessarily taking any particular example that I'm trying to build here. I'm literally just going to try and focus on actually what it is that you need to do to build a model-driven app, rather than a context of trying to set a scene of replacing a particular form or something like that. So let's just jump back over here. So the first thing you need to do then when you're building out your model-driven app is navigate to Powerapps. So I've just gone into office.com, gone to the sort of app launcher, selected Powerapps, and I've come to Powerapps. Now, the next thing is you need to make sure that you're in the right environment. Now, what I mean by that is inside of Powerapps, you can have multiple environments. By default, you'll have a default environment just called default. There's a lot of defaults in one sentence. But you can have multiple different environments. So I'm in my sandbox environment at the moment. And quite often, when you first get started with Powerapps and things like that, you might still just be using the default environment. But it's worth thinking about having different environments for like a development area, maybe a pre-production area, and a production area. And then you can actually move your model-driven apps between those areas nice and easily. It's actually really simple to do. So think about that when you're kind of building up your applications. Make sure you're building in the right kind of area, and also it's worth thinking a little bit about the environments in the future. That if you are going to have these as large scale kind of applications, then you do want to make sure you're using the environments properly. So the first thing I'm going to do is just navigate to this left-hand side where it says solutions and click on solutions. Now, solutions is basically like a solution file where you can package everything up, and that's essentially what actually moves between different environments, is the solution file itself. So everything that is inside of the model-driven app, everything that runs that model-driven app is packaged up into that solution. So I'm just going to click on new solution across the top, and I'm just going to call this my Hello World app. Now, the next thing you need to do is select the publisher. Now, I would just suggest at the moment, just select on default publisher for your org, and then click on create. What that will then do is it will set up your solution file for you. And when you select on it, it will open up. And at the moment, it's just going to be reasonably blank. It's not going to be a huge amount of stuff in here. Now, the object on the left-hand side will actually tell you exactly what is inside the solution file. So this is made up of multiple things. So over time, it'll be built up of things like you will have a model-driven app, you'll have tables inside of your model-driven app, you'll have flows, so what they call cloud flows is Power Automate workflows. You might have business rules, you might have different things like that, but it'll all be stored directly inside of this solution file. So now we've actually created our solution. The first thing that we actually need to do is we need to create our table. So model-driven app, as I say, it's all data focused. Everything we're doing in this model-driven app, it's all data focused. So it's all really about the table that the data sits in. And 90% of what we actually do to build a model-driven app is looking at the tables. So you need to get your head around how tables work. And if you're used to working with SQL, that'd be very useful in this kind of scenario, or even SharePoint lists and Excel kind of files are useful to understand different types of data and fields and how that comes together. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on New and then click on Table. And I'm just going to call this my Hello World table. And then I'm going to click on Save. Now, this is going to create me my table. It's going to create me the table inside of Dataverse. So basically, I could get access to this outside of this solution if I wanted to. It is creating as part of the tables, which is specific to that environment. So it's only going to be in the sandbox environment, this table at the moment. So this is then what the table view looks like. And actually, I can expand out what is inside of a table as well. So this is going to explain to me all the different things which I can configure about this particular table. Now, at the very top level, when you select this, you've got some summary views here. So it's going to show a little bit of data if there's any data which lived in here. It's going to show the default system columns, things like created by, when it was created, who created it, and things like that. Typical things, modified, when it was last modified, who modified it, that sort of stuff. Typical things you'd expect inside of a little sort of database table. Then on the left-hand side, and actually there's some shortcuts across the top right-hand side as well, we've got certain things in here which we're going to take a look at today. So columns is essentially where you would have all the kind of fields and things like that created. And in fact, I'll quickly just explain some of the key things we're going to be looking at today. All the things about like relationships. So we're not actually going to build any relationships in today's session, but essentially a relationship is where you can build a relationship between two tables. So it will either be kind of like a one-to-many, a many-to-one, or a many-to-many type of relationship. So you might want to say that there's one account, one company, sort of related to sort of many contacts, for example. So that's where you would create those kind of relationships. Other things which are worth knowing about is like forms, for example, where we can actually create forms which sit on top of our table, and that's used then to interface with actually the table to submit data to. So the way it kind of works is that you have to create your table, then you create your columns, you add your columns to your form, and then you add your form to the model-driven app, and then that's basically the process of how the model-driven app is then built up. We're going to take a look at some views as well. So views is basically like a way of having default view of the table. So at the moment, this is just the default view. But let's say, for example, if I wanted to remove created by and created on, I could do that as part of customizing the view of this table. Charts and dashboards are sort of interlinked. So you have to create charts which can then be added to dashboards. But charts, obviously graph charts, pie charts, things like that are visualizations of what the data of this table actually looks like. And then finally, what's worth knowing about is the business rules. And again, we're going to come on to talking a bit about this. But business rules essentially are a way of controlling the data at the data level. So you can apply a rule to say something like, it's a little bit of logic. So it's a little bit like saying, if this is equal to X, then do Y sort of thing. So it's a little bit of very simplistic logic, and it can be used for things like making fields required, hiding things, and different things like that. So we're going to take a little look at that shortly as well. So the first thing I need to do is actually create my columns. So if I go into columns, I can see all the different columns which are actually available to me inside of this by default. So these are just system ones which are automatically created, and there's actually a whole host of different kind of columns in here. As a default system ones you'd expect to get created by, modified by, and things like that. But then there's actually a few down here which, as a new sort of user, new starter of module apps it's worth knowing about. So we've got things like owning user, owning team, and owning business unit. And actually, it's worth understanding these because these are all the kind of, if you want to get into the finer details of security controls of your module-driven app, these three fields can actually be used for item level, so record level security controls. So this is actually where inside of the record you would specify that the, say, owning user is Dougie Wood, and then that would mean only I have access to it. You can create teams of users. So you could say this is the Powerapps team, and only the Powerapps team have access to the record. So you populate the field owning team with Powerapps team, and only we would have access to it. And then business unit is basically like the layer above a team. So it's like the department, for example, the business kind of unit functions and things like that. So then you might say, okay, well, all of technical delivery as the business unit has access to this particular record. So you can specify that group inside of there, and that will then allow that everybody inside that group. And I'm not going to cover off security in too much detail because that is getting a bit more kind of advanced, but just so you're aware, the groups can either be manually specified inside of kind of Powerapps, or you can actually use security groups, so like Azure AD security groups. So the waffling bit's over. So let's actually create a column now. So I'm going to click on new column, and I'm just going to call this example A. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this a yes no field. So if I click on this data type here, you'll see actually there's a whole bunch of different types of columns in here, and they're actually categorized. So for example, we've got text as a category, but if I hover over this little drop down here, there's different types of text. So we've got plain text, which is literally just plain text, there's nothing special about it. Text area, which is much bigger, kind of block of text, good for summaries, descriptions, things like that. Rich text, so we can have almost like rich HTML, colors, fonts, things like that. Email is actually well, same with phone number as well. Actually, it's actually making sure that whatever you put into that box adheres to the kind of the logic of that it is actually an email. So it's dougie@valto.co.uk, for example. And if it was missing an @ symbol, it'd be very obvious that it wasn't an email address. So it won't let you save the form. And the same goes for phone numbers as well. There's a little bit of kind of black magic in the background, which makes sure that what you're submitting does actually look like a phone number, and it's not going to let you submit that without it. Some other fields as well, like numbers, so you can have whole numbers, decimals, floats, durations and time zones and things like that. Dates, whether you want it to be date and time or date only. You can look up, so you can either look up directly to an existing kind of table or to a customer table, which is just a predefined table that exists inside of Dataverse. We've got choices, so we can either specify choices or, like I said before, I'm just going to go with a simple yes, no, because I'm going to use this column later on in my business rules to actually make another field required. So if I click on yes, no, and the default is no, I can actually change these labels. And also it's really important, recently they've shown that you can have these values here as well. So if you're ever going to do anything with Power Automate, which if you're going down this route of creating Power Apps and things like that, you're already probably on the track of Power Automate for building workflows and things like that. And actually, if you pull out a record from a table, say, for example, if I was to pull out a record from this Hello World table and I got the value of this record's field, example A, it won't show it to me as yes or no. It'll show it to me as 0 or 1. So it's worth knowing what that value is when you pull back, because then when you're doing any kind of conditions or logic to sort of say, if this is equal to no, rather than being equal to no, you'd be equal to 0, for example, just so you know that is the value that's actually stored against that choice. So the default choice says no, and I can click on save, and then that's created me my column. So that's my first column, which is example A. I'm just going to create another column, and this time I'm just going to call this my example B column, and I'm just happy there's a single line of text. I click on save. One thing to notice as well is actually how long it takes to create one of these fields. It's actually been quite quick for me today, luckily. But sometimes it can be a bit slow, a bit sluggish to actually create those fields. So make sure when you're building out this, you give yourself plenty of time to actually build out those fields. It's a little bit slower than, say, for example, creating a sort of SharePoint field or something like that, which saves it quite a bit quicker. So we've actually created our columns now. So this is actually all the columns that I'm going to build out. So although I've created the columns in my table, That's not actually reflected anywhere. So it's actually, they're available for me to use, but they're not actually on any of the forms that the table's using, any of the views or anything like that. So I'm going to need to add those to those areas. So the next thing I need to do is I'm going to go to the forms area of my model-driven app. So by default, you've got 3 forms. You've got a main form, which is the main form that's a model-driven app will use. You've got a quick view, which is basically if in another area of a model-driven app was looking up this particular table, you can have quick views, which is like a summary view, or a card view, which is a bit like on a dashboard when it's going to show a very small kind of card with maybe 2 or 3 fields or something like that. But I'm interested in the main form. So this is the main form that you'll see that in the model-driven app, when you go into my Hello World table and you select an item, this is the form that it's actually going to open up from there. So I'll open this up and let's take a little look inside of here. Okay, cool. So this is the new and improved model-driven apps editing sort of tool. And it's reasonably sort of simplistic in terms of the way that it's laid out. On the left-hand side, we've got all of the table columns that we've got, and on the right-hand side, we've got any properties for anything that we've selected. It's also worth knowing you can actually break out the kind of the layouts of this page. You don't just have to use one kind of form in this kind of way. And in fact, actually, if I just select this navigation bar on the left-hand side, if I click on components, you can actually see the different types of layouts that we can have. So at the moment, we're just using a 1-column section, which is just left to right 1 column. But say, for example, I could have a 2-column section, and all I need to do is drag and drop this. And there we go. We've got this new section in here. And get a new name. So I'll just call this section 2. And now if I drag those fields, you can actually drag and drop the fields. So I can drag and drop them down here. You can now see this has actually got 2 columns now. So rather than them being stacked on top of each other, like the section 1 across the top, we can have 2 sections. And actually, we can do that with 1, 2, 3, or even 4 column sections. I'm just by selecting a section and click on my delete button on my keyboard, that's then removed it. So those are the actual sections. So you can have up to 4 sections. Now, this does, as I say, it's a bit of a limitation. Again, it's something that I sometimes see people having a little bit of a grumble about, is that the way that you lay out things is very rigid. As I say, you can only have up to 4 column sections. And one thing that I've seen before is that, say, for example, if you wanted to have a 1 sort of section and then a sort of a 2-column section or something like that, it's always going to be follow the rules of the box that it's currently inside of. So say, for example, if you've got 4-column section and ideally you wanted 1, 2, 3, 4 and you wanted sort of 4 halfway down, as you add them into the different sections, it's always going to bring the fields right to the very top. So you can't align things necessarily in that kind of way. If you want them to be smaller kind of fields. I probably explained that quite badly, but hopefully you kind of get the gist. It's a little bit kind of rigid, and the fields will always take their layout and where they sit on the page by the column that they sit in, and then it'll always go to the top. It's not going to add any padding or anything like that, or you can't add any white space from the top. Other than using that kind of spacer, but the problem with that is then it doesn't necessarily align things properly. So it's a little bit challenging to get things to be laid out. So what I'll suggest is try and keep it reasonably simplistic. And if you do have a need to have multiple areas, multiple sections, what can be quite useful is to use tabs. So at the moment I've got 1 tab here called general, but I can actually add more tabs on here. So say, for example, I want to add another tab. All I need to do is click on it and I'll add a new tab on here. And then it just starts again. It's a fresh page on here. And I can call my tab something else, like tab 2. And this is a great way of breaking out the different kind of fields on the form. So you've got general fields and then secondary type of fields on your second tab. So that's basically how we can sort of lay out our kind of model-driven app form. Got different sections, and we can have different sections across multiple tabs as well. So let's just go back then to our column. So this is where we can see all of our kind of fields which are being used. And to add new fields, we just click on them, and then that'll automatically add them onto here. We can reorder them, so we can drag and drop them and move them around if we wanted to. but that's essentially how the form is then put together. So the next thing I need to do is save, and I'm going to publish this form. So now I'm happy with it. I've created my form. I've created whatever layout it is that I'm wanting to achieve. I've added my fields to this form. I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to publish it. And then this is then updated the form on the table, ready for me to start using. So once it's published, I say this can just take a couple of seconds to complete. Once it's actually complete, I'm going to go back using this back button across the top left hand corner. That's going to take me back into my solution file, and then I can see this new main form's now been updated. So I've now created my columns. I've added them to my form view. There's a couple of other bits and bobs that I want to do as well before I actually create the model-driven app. So the next thing I want to do is actually then, well, what are the views going to look like? So if I just roll back a little bit, the view is basically the view of the data inside of the table. So you can see this is the default view. This is what it will look like. These are the columns and the order that they're going to appear in. So a view is just literally this. What does the list of the table look like? So I'm going to go back into my views. And then again, we've got a whole bunch of different views that are pre-built for me. But actually, what I'm interested in is active Hello World tables. This is the default one, which is going to show across the top of my table. So I select on here, and now I can see this is what the columns are going to look like. So I've got name and created on. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to add in my example A and example B. So just by clicking on them, that'll add them into this list view, and I can actually reorder them. So if I select them, I can drag and drop them in order like that. I can even make them bigger. I'm just dragging out the columns. If I was expecting these going to have a larger bit of text, I can sort of drag and drop this to make this sort of look how I like. Now I can also do things like sorting, so I can sort by name, or I might want to sort by a different field, so sort by example A, example B, or when it was created, for example. So I can actually add multiple filters, multiple sorts. So I'm going to say created on is my sort by. And then for filter, at the moment it's got status is active. Now this is kind of like a carryover thing from inside of model-driven apps and Dataverse. It's very similar to what Dynamics features use, where they have this active and sort of deactivated type of statuses. So every record can either be active or deactivated. So rather than being deleted, you can deactivate it. So the default filter is as long as it's active. So you've not deactivated the record, it will show in this filter. If I then click on edit filters, you can see in here I can actually add different types of filters as well. So I could say it's created by somebody, or I'm only interested where example A is equal to yes. So my column is example A is equal to yes, and then it'll filter and show me everything which is in here. So I can add multiple filters in here as well. So you can have as many views as you like, and you can create different things. So I could say, okay, only show me where example A is equal to yes, for example. Okay. So that's creating a view. Now, all I need to do is click on save. And again, I'm going to save this. I'm going to be publishing this, and then this will then be ready for me to use in my model-driven app. Just publishing this, and then I'm going to navigate back to my model-driven app using this back button on the top left-hand corner. So we've created our columns, we've created our forms, and we've created our views of the table. Now, there's one final thing that I'm going to actually do before I create my model-driven app, is actually create some business rules. So I'm going to create a single business rule, actually, just conscious of time. So if I click on business rules, so to explain again what business rules are, they're essentially the simplistic logic of how you can apply logic directly to a field in a table. So it doesn't really matter where it's being used, the logic will still remain on that particular field. So if I click on new business rule, that's going to bounce me into a different kind of editing area. And actually at first you think, oh wow, what's all this? It looks totally different. But actually it's reasonably simplistic. It actually builds out a little kind of sort of chart, almost like a flow chart, process chart here. So we can see what this looks like. So it's based on conditions. So there's always a condition, a bit like Power Automate, where we can have kind of conditions say, if this is equal to this, then do that. And actually, it's written out in sort of human readable language down here. So if X, Y, and Z is equal to X, Y, and Z, then do this type of thing. So it's actually written down here as well. So we can add in conditions. We can also add in actions. So after our conditions, we can then add in an action. So we can do things like adding a recommendation. So in a certain scenario, it might be recommended that you provide a little bit more detail. So say, for example, that there's something where, say if you're building an app, which is car rental or something like that, and it might be that when someone's checked out a car or something like that, if it's long, if say, for example, the date of when it's being brought back is over a week or something, then it might be recommended that it's sort of provided like a mileage is recommended. So we find out how much mileage that the person's planning on using or something like that. We can use add a lock or unlock. So this is quite a simplistic thing as well, where we can actually lock a field based on something else. So we can actually lock something down or unlock something. So if something by default was locked, we may then unlock it under a certain circumstance. We can say add show error message. So if you wanted to show an error message, so something wasn't quite right, something didn't equal something else, you could then show an error message. So say, for example, that under a certain situation, it had to be a specific person that was filling out the form or something like that. And if it wasn't that person, you might want to show an error message, say you're not authorized for this or something. You can set a field value. So setting a field value and setting a default field value are actually two different things, but it's important to understand the two. So setting a default value actually will default it to that. So when you first sort of load something up, if something, say for example, there's two values, it might add the default value, but you can override it. Whereas a set field value is it permanently. So you've set the field value and that is it. Even if you change it, it'll override it and you can't get around it. And then you can do things like set business required. So this is actually where that field is now required. So say, for example, you need a particular bit of information provided. So let's go back to that example I was saying before about it's all about sort of car, you're taking a company car out or something like that, and if it's over a week's worth of time that you need to take that company car out for, then that's when maybe it sets the mileage field to business required, that you do have to sort of specify how many miles you anticipate you're going to sort of be using that car for. You can then use the add set visibility as well. So add set visibility is just basically showing and hiding a field. So it's a great way of customizing the user experience based on whether or not, say for example, if someone's part of a certain group or something like that, or maybe if a certain value, let's say for example, if somebody says that they want a car and you're going to say sort of how many seats or something like that or whatever, and then if they say that they want a 5-person car or something like that, then maybe then there's certain visibility of certain fields, like saying, okay, well, if you want a 5 sort of seat car, then obviously you can't select that you want a sports car or something like that, or whatever, from the sort of visibility of the checkbox for that car. So you can use visibility to control the user experience, and it's actually really useful to use business rules to control that user experience, because you can use a combination of them to sort of set and hide fields along with the visibility and the whether they're required or not at the same time. Whereas actually in certain things, like for example with SharePoint, it's almost impossible to do that, because you actually specify whether a field is required or not at the sort of the list level, and then it's very difficult then to go back from that. Whereas with this, you don't have to specify that, and you can control the user experience. You can set it to be required or not required as you kind of move through that kind of process. So the first thing I do is actually just set my condition. So if I go into my condition, you can see it automatically knows which, it's saying entity. This is an old word for table, but imagine anywhere you see entity, here's a top tip for you. Anywhere you see entity, it means table inside of Dataverse. And then we're going to say our field. So I'm going to say my example A is equal to yes. and then click on apply. Another top tip with setting up business rules, and actually when we come on to talk about business process flows as well, is always make sure you click that apply button, because if I was to select that yes and then I clicked off somewhere else, it wouldn't save it and it would lose whatever I've put in here. It's a little bit of a bugbear of mine, but you do have to remember to click on that apply button for it to actually take effect. So you could already see here the conditions starting to come together. So if example A equals yes, then I can then add an action. So I'm going to say set business required. So I'm just going to set my other field I created, my example B, that is actually make it business required at that point. So now I click apply, so you can see if example A equals yes, then set example B as business required. So it means it's actually required. So now if I click on save, that's going to save my business rule. Once it's saved, you need to make sure that you click on activate. So sometimes I've seen people create business rules before and they're wondering, oh, come to me, oh, Dougie, my business rule's not working. I can't figure out why. And it's just a little schoolboy error that actually you just need to come into here. Make sure you click on activate. And then what will pop up is a little secondary box here, which will almost say, are you sure? Do you want to make sure that you're activating this particular business rule for it to start working? So once this pop-up box has appeared, so this is a little bit of a pain sometimes with model-driven apps, that it can be a little bit slow at times, and that's just one of the things sometimes when you're sort of building this, you just need to factor in. It's probably going a little bit extra slow because I'm sharing my screen and using Teams events and things like that, so it's probably coming to a little bit of a halt. So I'm just going to refresh this. And then let's just try the activate button one more time. Here we go. And then it's going to say, are you sure? Basically, I'm going to say, yes, activate, please. And that's then going to activate my business rule. Something else I forgot to mention before I activate it is you can always change the name of it as well. So because I've activated it, I can't actually change this name right now. I'd have to deactivate it and then change it. But it's worth giving it a name as well. So give your business rules names. Come up with a naming convention which means something to you, so you can tell what your business rules are actually impacting and what they're supposed to be doing. So now we've got our business rule. I'm just going to come out of here and I'll just quickly, there we go, didn't even need to refresh. There we've got my new business rule that's now appeared. So I've got that business rule, which is going to set the example B columns are required only if example A column is equal to yes. So there's my business rule created. So just a quick recap. We've created the table, we created the solution, we created the table within the solution. We've then created the columns within the table. We've added those columns to our form. We've added the columns to the view and ordered it in a way that we like. And then we've added a business rule to the form, which is impacting these columns, which is going to make the fields required under certain logic. So the next thing that we need to do is actually create our model-driven app. So now we've got everything we need in place that we can actually create the model-driven app. So if I go on to click on apps on the left-hand side of my solution file, I can click on new, and then under app, I've got model-driven app. So select model-driven app, and I'm just going to call this my Hello World app, and then click on create. That will then create me my model-driven app. So this is starting to spin things up. And the next screen that I'm going to see is actually going to start directing me to say, well, what do you want to include in your model-driven app? So as I say, it's all kind of a pre-built kind of experience. So all I need to do is click on add page. And then it's going to say, okay, well, what do you want to add? So the two main things you might want to add is a table based on a view and form. So that is what we're going to do in a second. We've already created our table with a view and a form. So it's just going to plug this into our model-driven app. Or I could say dashboard. So if I built some charts and I built a dashboard from multiple charts being put together, I could add the first page as a dashboard page if I wanted to. But I've not built that. So I'm just going to add my table based on view and form. So click on next, and it's going to say, okay, well, what particular one is it? So if I just search for Hello World table, select that, and I want it to show the navigation. The navigation is just what appears on the left-hand side. So I'm going to click on add, and that's then going to add for me my table. So as you can see now, I've got my table Hello World table on the left-hand side. I've got my list view. So the name, example A, example B, and when it was created. And it's actually ordering, it's sorting by created on at the moment, as I set in my view. And now all I need to do, if I click on play, just click on save and continue, but click on play, this is now going to show me then what my my model-driven app will then look like. There we go. So this is what it would look like then to an end user. So it might still need some tidying up in terms of changing, obviously, the names of the tables. You can change the navigations, like group 1, you could change that to navigation, or you can have subheadings and stuff like that in your navigation. So create a new item, click on new, and then we can see this is the form that we've created, and it's got that blank tab 2 that we looked at creating before. Under name, we can then just put in, say, Dougie Wood. Owner will also, the owner field will also default automatically to the person who's creating the field. And then with a little bit of luck, if I change this to yes, did you see that change then? So let me just refresh the page. It's worth mentioning as well that with business rules, you need to factor in that things might change in the form. So someone might accidentally set this to yes, but they want to change it back to no. Whereas if I've just with my very simplistic one-step logic there, it's actually just gone backwards. So if I select example A and change this to yes, you can then see this is now changed this to a required field. So now I have to submit it, otherwise it won't let me save if I don't put anything in here. Click on save. Oh. Save and close, and that's then created my record. So this is my record in here. Just create another one. Close. There we go. So now you can see that's how it's simple to create the form in here. Now, the very last thing that I wanted to quickly show you is how we create a business process flow. So the business process flow is actually what we see across the top of our records, like what we were looking at before, where there was like a start, a kind of sort of review stage and a complete stage and things like that. So this is fairly straightforward to do. So if I open up, oops, where have we gone in here? So if I open up the model-driven app editor once again, then on the left-hand side and here, under automation, I can add a business process flow. So if I click on that, it's going to say, okay, well, these are ones we can already find. So there's some pre-built ones that are either there or ones that we've built before for other applications. So you can actually use the same kind of business process flow and apply it in different apps if you wanted to. But I'm just going to quickly create a new one. So I'm going to call this my Hello World process. And that will then automatically set the name. And then I just need to choose the table that this is actually going to be part of. So select my Hello World table. Click on Create. And then this is then creating me the business process flow. So just to recap what a business process flow is, it's the gateways, it's the stages that that particular record within the table could travel through. And this is what's going to manage your processes. So if this is something that you want to have things which have like a start, a sort of pending stage, an approval stage, a complete stage, or whatever it is, this is how you build this out. So we've got here the different stages. So we can add a new stages. So click on add stage. This. And as you see, we could build out branches as well, and you can add in conditions. So it's worth knowing the conditions as well, because let's say, for example, it might be that let's go back to the example before where we were looking at sort of taking out company cars. If, say, for example, the company car that was selected is over £50,000 or something like that, maybe another branch comes in where we need a director's approval to actually take that out. So that's actually another kind of element of this is the condition of this. So the conditions actually all need to make sure they've got some form of data step. So the stages which exist inside of these different business process flows need to be doing something. So the data step needs to sort of show a field value. So let's just quickly just say it's going to be the created by value. So I can click on apply. I've just seen the time as well. So I'm just going to speed this up a little bit, just because I'm conscious of time. Lost my mouse here now. And then all I'm going to do is just create my stages with some names. So this stage, I'm just going to call stage 1. Well, imagine this could be like not started or something like that. This might be in review as a stage. And then the final one might be, say, for example, approved or something like that. I'm just sort of trying to make them stand out. So stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So once we've then got our stages in here, we click on save. And then we need to activate it. So same with the kind of business rules, we need to activate this as well. So click on activate and a little pop-up box is going to appear and say, sure, you want to activate. We say yes, click on activate. And then this might just take a couple of seconds to activate. Oh, page is not responding. That's not good. The curse of the live demonstration. I'll just try a quick refresh. Just conscious of time. I'm hoping I can try and show this to you guys. It's looking good. Right, that should have activated. So if we come back into here now, just save this. And we'll publish it. So publishing it just puts everything together, gives it a good refresh, make sure everything's together. And then, once it's refreshed, should see those items. Cool. So we'll click on play and then we'll have a look at what the app looks like again. So now, if I open up this record, it may just take a couple of minutes to come through. But essentially, once it's actually saved through, and unfortunately, I think we've run out of time, it will appear across the top of this record. So it will appear, and we'll have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, a little bit like if I just come back to here, where we've got this is our business process flow. So I've set up, track, select and execute, close an award, and actually you can move manually just through these different things. So here's a little example of this business process flow. It's actually much better than my example, where you can actually see in here that you can have a little tick box to say, is the announcing voting complete? And we can say yes, it's complete, yes, it's complete. And then once that's all done, then we can actually move on to say, okay, let's move on to the setting this to the next kind of stage and things like that. So you can actually prevent stages from moving on until all the sort of check boxes are ticked. So these are ticked. Or you could actually prevent this from going to the next stage if we wanted to, unless these 2 boxes were ticked. So you're making sure that certain processes are being followed in order for it to actually change from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, for example. Okay. Cool. So just go back in here. Just as a quick recap then, a final recap of what we've done today to build our Hello World app. We've created a solution. Inside the solution, we then created a table. Inside the table, we then created the columns. We've added those columns to a form. We've added those columns to a view. We then created a business rule, which made fields required. We then created our model-driven app. And then within the model-driven app editor, we then created a business process flow, which is then managing the different stages. So before we go to any sort of Q&As, just to sort of wrap up on this, it's worth mentioning that we do offer services and workshops specifically for Powerapps and developing both Canvas apps, model-driven apps, Powerapps portals, and anything else Power Platform. We can deliver workshops on today's topics to help do things like demonstrate how you can kind of use Powerapps, how to structure your data. We interview with key stakeholders to get their requirements. We create wireframes, and we also provide a workshop report. So we can offer all of that, as well as other workshops as well. So we offer workshops specifically around Teams adoption, using SharePoint to build our intranets, modern workplace ways of working, Power Platform strategies, and other areas of Microsoft 365. So if any of that is of interest to you, please do reach out to us at hello@valto.co.uk. So you should also have the option at the moment of being able to submit questions through the Q&A function of Teams. So across the top, you should have the option of submitting any questions. I can just see there's a few in here. So I'm just going to come to this. Okay. So one question here Can you build using existing SharePoint lists as table? Unfortunately, not. You can't apply a model-driven app to a SharePoint list. Model-driven apps will only actually work with Dataverse tables. It's not to say that you can't map the data from SharePoint into Dataverse or even migrate it completely into Dataverse, but you can't do a direct overlay. So that is another benefit of Canvas apps versus model-driven apps in terms of that Canvas apps. You can just tap straight into a SharePoint list. You can't do that, unfortunately, with model-driven apps. Just mention there, great session, thanks a lot. You're welcome, thank you for joining. So which Office 365 products do I need to license for model-driven apps? So great question. So actually there is a license specifically for Powerapps. So it does require an additional license to use model-driven apps, whereas most people are already licensed to use Canvas apps. So it's worth taking a little look at Microsoft's licensing page for the up-to-date cost of what that is. How can data be restricted based on job role? So that's a little bit like what we were talking about earlier about the different columns that are pre-built into the table of Dataverse. So you have things like the team owners, the business unit, things like that. So you could create a group or a team with that job role. So say, for example, if the job role was managers, you could create a managers team, add people to that, and then you add that managers team to the owning team field. And that will mean then that data is only accessible to people in that group. Can data be imported into model-driven Powerapps? So it's worth noting that the data itself isn't necessarily migrated into model-driven apps. As we've seen in today's kind of session, the model-driven app is purely just the final stage of this. It's just the front face to the Dataverse table. So actually the data is being migrated into the Dataverse table itself. And yes, there is ways of doing that. There are data flows and also simple options is actually you can import a CSV. So as long as the CSV maps in terms of the way it's kind of structured to the Dataverse table, you can use an import from CSV as well. Can you change the links on the left-hand navigation bar? Yes, you can do. So you can have links to the dashboards, you can have links to the tables, and you can even have links to external things as well if you wanted to link out to something else as well. Another question, does JavaScript error message and the business rule error message are the same? So they're not necessarily the same. You can use JavaScript in model-driven apps, so it is a supported method that you can use JavaScript libraries to manipulate events which are going on inside of model-driven apps. I mean, that's quite an advanced piece of functionality, but actually the business rule which is handling the error message is not actually the same as the kind of JavaScript, injecting your kind of own JavaScript into that. Okay, cool. That looks like we've answered all of the questions there for you guys. If you do have any questions, feel free to email me. My email is dougie@valto.co.uk. If you would like any kind of follow-up sessions or to talk about how we can help you with model-driven apps or any other Power Apps, you can email hello@valto.co.uk and a member of our commercial team will be able to speak to you. I really want to thank you for your time and attending. This has been recorded and it will be accessible on our YouTube channel as well. There's plenty of other webinars and how-to guides and videos on YouTube, so please do check that out as well, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.